Forward to jumping into this session here this afternoon. I want to show you this. Is she in here? A lady gave me this morning. She came up to me right before the service. And these are coin cookies. Yes, thank you. And this is a $2 bill cookie. How cool is that? I had to show you all that this is like the coolest gift that anybody's ever given me on one of these financial wellness weekends. So I remember going on a field trip when I was a kid, and we went to one of those like old, how to describe it? It was like one of those places where they show you how people used to live like way back in the day, right? Like historical reenactment type of places. And one of the places was the church building. And they were telling us how they used to do church back in like the Pilgrim days. And apparently they were like the most boring, dry services you can imagine. And they were like 4 hours long. And they showed us that the ushers, I guess, had this like stick, and it had a feather on the end of it, and they told us, I don't know if this is true, but this is what they told the kids. They're like, if a girl was falling asleep, they would tickle her nose with the feather to get her to wake up. But if a boy was falling asleep, they'd whack him over the head with the stick. And I was like, that seems... But I think we ought to try it this afternoon. We just ate lunch, and I'm a little bit scared that you're going to fall asleep on me, so maybe Pastor Josh can... we can use the microphone. That works, yeah. So, this session here this afternoon, we're going to do a little Q&A time right after it. I want to give you some really practical ways to live out your finances. It's going to be, I understand in the room this afternoon, we have a wide swath of people in different financial situations, different stages of life. So how do we give you something that works for everybody? So here's what I want to get at. I want us to get to the why behind our finances, and what I'm going to do by the end of this session, I'm going to equip you with how to build for yourself a one-page financial plan. I don't know if you've ever felt this way before. As a kid, my parents would tell me, all right, bedtime's at 8:30, and it would be 8:02, and I'd be looking at the clock, just praying that it could slow down somehow. Like, could there somehow magically be more time that I can find before bedtime, because I don't want to go to sleep? But have you ever felt kind of the same phenomenon with your money? You're looking at payday, you're looking at the bank account, and you're like, can I magically stretch this money out somehow? Can I magically multiply this money? Like, how do I get more impact? How do I make my money go farther? Maybe you've thought about that before. That's what we want to talk about today. How do I make my money go farther? How do I get more impact with what I have? Not necessarily how do I get more money, although that's great. If we can do that too, that's great. But how do I have more impact with what I already have? And so no matter if you are a teen, whether you are retired, whether you are facing a mountain of debt, or you are in the best financial shape of your life, no matter where you're at this afternoon, there's going to be something in here for you. So there's going to be a lot. We're going to cover a lot of material. So just buckle in, stay with me. What we're about to go through is about 7 weeks worth of material from a course called MoneyWise that I put together. So I'm trying to like really truncate it down to this afternoon. So there's going to be a lot of things that you might feel like, oh, he kind of went fast through that, but I'm going fast through that because we have a lot to cover. So how many of you, by raise of hands, have seen that show Alone on the History Channel? Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Nobody in here? Okay, all right. You are in for a treat, okay? If you've never seen that show before, it's really, really cool. Here's the premise. They take 10 people, and they take them up to the wilderness, usually like in somewhere in Canada, really remote, and they drop each person off in their own remote location, and you have to survive. You're allowed to bring 10 items from an approved list of items, things like a tarp or a knife or an axe or, like survival materials. Last person standing wins $500,000, some seasons $1 million. But if you can't make it, you just call in on the radio and say, I'm tapping out, and they'll come and get you. But you're on your own otherwise. It's really amazing. And this is coming from a guy who would not last 1 week on that show, okay? I'm not a survivalist, but it really fascinates me watching other people survive. And here's what I've noticed. When I watch that show, in the first episode, when you meet all the 10 contestants, there's like 2 or 3 that I'm like, that one, I bet they're going to win. They really seem to have all their stuff together. So far, and I've watched like 4 or 5 seasons, never gotten it right. Like the people that I think are so clear favorites don't end up winning. And here's what I've learned in watching that show. In order to win, you need a combination of technical knowledge, but you have to have a really strong, compelling why that keeps you in the game. Because it's going to get tough out there. It's going to get cold. It's going to get lonely. It's going to get difficult. You're going to be hungry. And if you don't have a really strong reason why you need this money and why you need to win this game, you're tapping out. So here's what I'm here to tell you this afternoon. You can have technical knowledge about finances. You can know about the stock market and you can know about banking and budgeting, and those are great. I'm not discounting it. I think that's wonderful. But what's more important is that you have a very compelling reason why behind your financial decisions. You need both. So if you ever tried to do like a new diet or a new workout regimen and it didn't go well, you didn't stick with it, well, there's probably a reason for that, right? There was some compelling why or something that was missing in all of that. And so what I want to get across to you this afternoon is your why is more important than the what. We want to talk about what, and we have a Q&A about some what type of questions. What credit card or bank account should I use? Well, should I get a 15-year mortgage or a 30-year mortgage? Should I invest in this mutual fund or that mutual fund? And those are all good questions, and there's a time and place for them. But more important than what is why. And that's where we're going to be in this first section. Bill W., who's the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, he said this: all progress starts by telling the truth. All progress starts by telling the truth. And what I'm going to invite you to do this afternoon is to tell the truth. Not to me, but to yourself. Tell the truth about your finances. And if you're not willing to tell the truth about your finances, we can't expect to get anywhere, can't expect to make any progress. So we have to be honest with ourselves. So section number 1 is entitled Finding Your Why, quote unquote, finding your why. Love this quote from Stephen Covey: if the ladder is not leaning against the right wall, every step we take just gets us to the wrong place faster. Unfortunately, there's lots of people in this world today that have their ladder up against the wrong wall. They're chasing something that they're going to get to the top of that wall and realize, oh, this isn't what I wanted in the first place. So the very first step to building your one-page financial plan is crafting what I call a financial why statement. There are a few questions you see on your handout. We're going to walk through them together. I'm going to give you a little bit of homework. I know you're not my students, and I know this is not school, but I am going to give you some homework this weekend, and I'll get to that here at the end. But question number 1, in order to develop a financial why statement, the first question we have to ask ourselves is, what about money is important to you? What about money is important to you? And what I would invite you to do right now is I just want you to just start jotting down whatever comes to mind. There's no right or wrong answer. Don't worry about being too spiritual or, I bet Nate's going to tell us the real answer I should have put here in a second. No, just what about money is important to you? Just take a second. I want you to just jot whatever first comes to mind. And we're not going to have time in this session, but what you really need to do in order to really develop that answer is you need to ask why to what you wrote down. So for instance, if I ask somebody, what about money is important to you? And they wrote, well, I need to make sure that my needs are taken care of. Okay, sure. But why is it important to have your needs taken care of? Well, I feel a sense of responsibility that I need to take care of my family and make sure that they're provided for. Okay, good. Well, why is that important? Well, growing up, I lived in a house where finances were kind of chaotic and we didn't really have a lot of security in that area, and I just don't want my family to experience that. Oh, okay, so really, it's not about paying bills, it's about creating a home environment that has security and that has that is free from chaos or confusion around finances. You see what I mean by that? Like by asking those follow-up why questions, we're getting closer to the real reason behind that. That's a question I'd invite you to wrestle with and really think deeply about. But second clarifying question is this. Fast forward 5 years from now. All right, so imagine future you, 5 years from today, the year is 2030. What would need to change for you to feel financially healthy? Again, I'd take a few seconds, write whatever comes to mind. 5 years from now, what would need to be different in future you's life in order for you to feel like, hey, I'm in a good place. I'm financially healthier than I am today. Okay, and then the third question, and this is my favorite question, and notice we're getting deeper as we go, like it's getting more profound, these questions that we're asking ourselves. The Jim Collins, the author of Good to Great, the 2010 test. Okay, imagine for a second that you had $20 million in the bank. Okay, this is fun. What would you do? I mean, you don't have to work anymore. You are financially secure for the rest of your life. If you don't want to go to work on Monday morning, you don't have to go to work on Monday morning. What do? How do you spend your day? How do you spend your week? And then, second part of that question, what would you do if you had 10 years left to live? And this is a little bit more of a sobering question. But what if you knew that in 10 years from now, you were going to pass away? And you would have the same standard of living that you have now. You'll feel completely healthy, but you have 10 years left to live. Would that change anything? Is there anything that you would start doing differently from what you're doing now? And again, take a couple seconds. I just want you to jot down anything that comes to mind. Again, no right or wrong answers. I just want to get us thinking in this direction. You say, Nate, these are kind of uncomfortable questions. These are tough. I don't know. Well, that's good. It's good because these are very important answers that we have to wrestle with, and it's going to take a little bit of thinking and a little bit of honesty. But all of those questions are going to help us to develop something like what you see in the next section, a sample statement. Again, there is no right statement here. Let me just give you some examples of things that other people have put as their financial why statement. After thinking about those three questions, they say, okay, why is money important to me? What's my financial why statement? I never want to be a burden to my kids, and I want to leave them an inheritance. I want to share experiences with my family and raise responsible, independent children. If you look at that last one there, have a flexible schedule, travel with my family, and be generous with my time and money. That's mine. That's my financial why statement, right? So I'm giving you a moment of transparency to say, hey, this is something that I go through and I think through. Now, you say, Nate, is this like a forever statement? No. Is this something that like I carve it in marble and I never change it? No. Your financial why statement may be different in 5 years from now. But right now, from where you are, what would you say? Why is money important to you? Let's put it this way. The purpose of money in my life is to ... And in that bottom section there, write out your financial why statement. There'll be a section at the end of this session, so you don't necessarily have to write anything in that space right now. But what I would encourage you to do is really give some thought. This is going to be part of your homework. And craft a simple statement, one sentence or two. Don't write a book, don't write a paragraph, just as concisely as you know how to word it. Why is money important to me? What role do I want money to play in my life? And this is really important because it's from this, we're going to start to be able to make better financial decisions as part of the rest of this one-page plan. Okay, so let's move now to section number 2. So now that we've put together a financial why statement, the next task is to start aligning our money. I'm a big history buff. I just love all things history. Pastor Josh took me down to Princeton last night. It was just really cool to see some of those old buildings and just so much American history in this area. There was a great story of the expedition to the South Pole, if you've ever heard that story before. It was one of the last places to ever be explored by humans because, of course, the South Pole and Antarctica, as remote as it gets. Well, there was an English expedition put together by Robert Scott, and it was very well funded, very well organized. And it seemed like they were going to be the first ones. But at the same time that he left England, there was another expedition led by a Norwegian named by Roald Amundsen, and he was also going to try to be the first guy to get to the South Pole. And it was a little bit of a David and Goliath type of story because on paper, Robert Scott and his English expedition, much more ships, much more men, much more supplies, like much more funding, just everything. They had more of. But in the end, Roald Amundsen beat Robert Scott to the South Pole by like 5 weeks. Tragically, Robert Scott didn't even make it back from the South Pole. They reached the South Pole, but they died on the way back from exposure. It's a really, really sad story. After looking back into what happened, though, what they found is the reason Roald Amundsen succeeded and Robert Scott did not is Robert Scott and his expedition were trying to do too many things. They wanted to reach the South Pole, yes, but they were going to try to do a bunch of experiments. And then they were going to try to do it, quote-unquote, the right way. We're not going to rely too much on dog sleds because we're Englishmen and we have grit and determinism. We're going to show our superior. And it was really foolish. And because Roald Amundsen was singularly focused and the only thing he cared about was getting to the South Pole and getting back alive, he succeeded. And because Robert Scott got bogged down by all these other things, he lost sight of the mission and he failed. And the lesson we have for ourselves is we have to be singularly focused on the mission. There's lots of things that compete for our attention and compete for our money, but we have to be aligned. Does how you use your money align with what you say is important to you? That's a really important question to consider. Okay, because I could sit down with you one-on-one, and I could say, tell me about why money is important to you. Give me your financial why statement. And I bet you could give me a good one. It would sound really profound, really spiritual. Wow, that's good. And then if I said, well, let's look at the credit card statement. Let's look at the bank account. Well, let's see where the money is actually going. You might be like, oh, no. We don't need to do that because they're out of alignment. There's a mismatch there. How do we get on the same page? How do we make sure that our money is actually being used for the things that truly matter? All of your money, and here's if you want to write in these blanks, all of your money goes into one of the following 4 buckets. And this comes from Ron Blue, founder of Kingdom Advisors. Live, give, grow. Live, give, grow. All of your money goes into one of those 4 buckets. Live, give, grow. And we're going to spend the rest of our session really delving into these. You know the reason why most people hate budgeting? And I know you're like, oh, he said it. I was hoping we would escape this Sunday without having to talk about budgeting. Yeah, I think the reason people hate budgeting is because they feel like it's a punishment for being bad with money, right? Like, oh, I messed up with money, and my punishment is now I must be beat over the head with the budget. Like, you bad with money, must use budget now. And maybe if I get good with money, then I don't have to use a budget anymore. But really, a budget the way it should be used, is simply a way to align your money with your values so that you can say yes to more important stuff and say no to less important stuff. That's really what a budget is, right? It allows us to put money towards the things that actually matter so that less of it gets wasted on things that are less important. So, once you have your financial why statement, then you can start writing out financial goals. And they have to flow from your financial why statement. If I asked you this afternoon, what are your financial goals? It's almost like there's like a little bit of like a panic response. I wasn't ready for the pop quiz. What are my financial goals? We don't really think about that, right? We're not wandering about our day like, what are my financial goals? And if anything, we probably just say something that we heard somebody else say, retire with $1 million or be debt-free. There's nothing wrong with those aspirations, but those aren't necessarily goals. A goal is something that helps me to accomplish my financial why statement. So to back up for a second, I said my financial why statement is to have a flexible schedule to travel with my family and to be generous with my time and money. Well, if I want to travel with my family, well, that's going to take some money, right? So one of my goals might be I'm going to save X number of dollars a month into a savings account for our next vacation. Does that make sense? Because if that's what I want to do with my money, then I have to come up with goals that are going to help me to execute that. Because I can have a why statement, but it's never going to get done unless I give myself some parameters, some goals to be able to support that. So let me write this down. When you're thinking of a goal, it needs to be, and many of you have heard this acronym before, it needs to be SMART. Heard that before? SMART goals. Specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-based. Okay, so saying, I'm going to save more money. That's not a good goal because it's not specific. How much money? right? When am I going to save the money? Measurable, okay? Similarly, like we have to give, like, okay, what day of the week, from which bank account, how much, into which account. Actionable. It has to be something that has, that's something that I can do. It can't just be a wish or sort of a vague idea. Realistic. Okay, you say, well, I'm going to save for retirement. I'm going to save 50% of my paycheck. Okay, oh, all right, well, that might not be very realistic. Let's start with 3%. Let's start with 5%. And time-based. Okay, when am I going to do this? How often am I going to do this? Monthly, weekly, every paycheck, etc. A lot of times people will throw out goals that are not really goals. They'll say, I'm going to pay off my debt. That's not a goal, or at least not a smart goal. How? Which credit card? How much? When will I have it paid off? You know what I'm saying? So make sure that your goals are specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-based. Okay, now let's go through these 4 cash buckets. Give, live, owe, grow. We're going to start number 3, section 3 with give. Let's talk about give. There's this island, or this lake in Texas called Lake Travis. It's a reservoir. And so with the reservoir, the level of the water fluctuates quite wildly. When the water level is low, there's a little island that pops up in the middle of the lake. But when the water level is high, it covers up that island. When the water level is low, boats a lot of times will go out there and just dock by the island and hang out there. And as a joke, some of the locals will put a for sale sign on the island when the water level is low. And of course, it's a big inside joke because no one would ever build a house on sometime island, is what they call it. Why would you ever build something permanent on a place that is, by definition, temporary? And when it comes to our giving, that's how we have to think. This world is sometime island. It's a place to go and have a good time, but you don't want to build a house there. You don't want to build anything of permanence there because it's fragile and it's fleeting. And it's just like we talked about this morning. We want to instead invest in eternity. I love this quote from Randy Alcorn. You can't take it with you, but you can send it on ahead. Don't you love that? It's a great way to think about it. Can't take it with you, but you can send it on ahead. Let me give you 3 statements about what the Bible says about giving. Number 1, giving is an act of I've got these mixed around in my notes. I apologize. Giving is active. Okay, well let's move to number 2. I got these mixed up in my notes. Giving number 2. Giving is an act of faith. Number 3. Giving is an act of love. And number 1, I'm sorry, giving is an act of worship. I apologize. Forgot I have them up on the screen in front of me. Giving is an act of worship, giving is an act of faith, giving is an act of love. Okay, so worship. When we give to the Lord, we are worshiping. Did you know that? Like, worship isn't just singing. Worship isn't just prayer or reading the Bible or listening to a sermon. Giving is worship because we are expressing to the Lord our love and our value of Him. Giving is an act of faith because what we're saying is, by faith, I believe that it's better for me to give instead of have. Because, I mean, let's face it, if God is not real and heaven is just a myth, well, then you're throwing your money away when you give it, right? Just keep it for yourself. Buy a nicer car. Go on a better vacation. Like, do something with it, right? But you don't believe that. You believe by faith that generosity has a greater benefit in the life to come. And so every time you're generous, you're expressing your faith. And then giving is an act of love. And that's the most important motivation that should motivate our giving. You know, just like John 3:16, for God so loved the world that He gave. You know, you can give without loving, but you can't love without giving. You realize that, right? I mean, you can give and throw in some money in the Salvation Army bucket and not actually care. But if you love someone, you're going to give. You're going to give of yourself, not just financially. You're going to give of your time and your attention, right? So giving is paramount to the Christian faith. Now, I talked about the 4 buckets. If you want to take an audit of your financial health, here's a really good way at a high level to do that. Figure out how much of your money is going into each of those 4 buckets. I'm going to pull these up right now. We're going to come back to this at the end. I want these visually to represent your 4 buckets. Give, live, owe, grow. And imagine, this might be a bad choice to pull this out now because it's too distracting. Imagine these M&Ms, okay? Don't be looking at the M&Ms the whole time. Imagine this is your income. How much of your income are you putting in each of these buckets? Okay? How much of your income goes to generosity? How much goes towards growing and saving? We're going to get to those here in a second. And I'm going to come back to this illustration at the end. But I want you to be keeping that visual in mind as we go through this. How do I know how much is going to the give bucket? How do I calculate my give score? Well, pretty simple. Add up how much you give to your church. It could be tithe, it could be missions, it could be giving to the church building, etc. Other charitable giving, if you give to, a crisis pregnancy center or a local food bank or other type of Christian ministry. If you give one-time gifts, I wouldn't include in there like birthday gifts and anniversary gifts. I mean, if you want to, I suppose, but I feel like that's cheating a little bit. That's not quite the point of like charitable giving. So add all that up and find out how much you give, and that might be on a monthly basis or on a yearly basis. But all you need to do is just divide your total household income by how much you give, and that will give you a percentage. So, for example, if you add up all your giving for the year and it adds up to $10,000 and your household income is $100,000. You say, Nate, my household income isn't $100,000. I'm using that because it's a nice, easy number to do division on. Okay, that's the only reason. Okay, 10,000, 100,000, 10%. You see how we did that? Okay, if you have $100,000 household income, 10,000 to give, 10% is going to the give bucket. Your give score is 10%. Now, I have here like giving score ranges, all right? Maybe Pastor Josh will take issue with me on this. This is my opinion, all right? 0 to 5% is low. In America, the average giving rate is 3%. That's low, okay? I think we can do better than that. But this is not about a percentage. Like, I don't want to make this about like, okay, give at least this percent and then you're good. No. Think about how you want to be as a person and how generous you want to be. And between you and the Lord, determine what that looks like for you. But I would say if it's 0 to 5% would be low, 5 to 15% would be good, and anything above 15% would be excellent. But again, I'm not trying to tell you, hey, you got to, it's 10% on the dot or it's 12% or make that between you and the Lord. But maybe a good thing to do this week is to figure out what that number actually is if you're not already aware. Okay, practical tips for increasing your giving score. Let me give you rapid fire a bunch of different ideas. Number 1, automate your giving. You guys have online giving, right? So if you're like, hey, my income's steady, I know how much I want to give each month, boom. Just don't even make it a question. Just automate your giving. Create a discretionary giving category in your budget. I love this one. Just like you might have like fun money that you plan for, like you set aside a few $100, like this is just for us to go have a good time, do whatever we want to do. What about setting some money aside in your budget to bless somebody? To when you hear, oh, I heard about this person that needs some help, boom, I got money in the budget already planned and I can deploy that. Think about being generous not just with your money, but with your time, your skill, and attention. Some of the most generous people I've ever met don't have any money. Okay, so this is not just about, okay, if you have lots of money, then give, and if you don't have money, don't worry about giving. No, be a generous person and be creative. There's lots of things that you can do. You can make money-shaped cookies for people, okay? You can do lots of great things to be a blessing. It doesn't have to just be finances. Increase giving proportionately as your income increases. Here's what I mean by that. Remember we talked about lifestyle creep? Oh, I got a raise, $10,000 a year. Okay, great. Well, as part of that, make sure that you're increasing your giving along with that, okay? Because sometimes we can just sort of do that mental math and be like, oh, I got some extra money, so I'm just going to go and take a vacation, or I'm going to buy this thing. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but use your increases in your income to also increase your generosity. Create an estate plan. I don't feel bad saying this. Maybe Pastor Josh would feel awkward telling you this because he's the pastor, but I don't know you folks. I live in Florida, so I can say this and I don't feel bad about it whatsoever. You really need to think about your estate plan and charitable giving in your estate plan. One of the most powerful ways you might be able to give is not in this life, it's when you pass. You think about, investment accounts or bank accounts or homes or these types of things. Okay, first thought is probably take care of my family, which I think should be your first thought. Make sure that my family's taken care of and I want to bless them. But second to that, what other organization, what other community do you belong to that's more important and is more powerful and is doing a better work than your church, right? So think about, there's plenty of people that I've seen and experienced, maybe they left these accounts to their kids and then they left the home to the church or some combination of that. So think about that. That could be a great way to be generous. Some people have given more at the end of their life than they were able to give during their life. Isn't that amazing? A qualified charitable distribution from your IRA. Let me just explain this real quick. If you're in retirement and you have money like in a 401k or an IRA account, you're probably already aware of this. The IRS is going to make you take some of that money out once you reach age 73. Okay, our government may not be great at everything, but they are good at getting their tax revenue. Okay, they're very efficient at that. And what's going to happen is you might reach a point where the government tells you you have to take out X number of dollars this year, but you're like, but I don't want to. I don't need that money. Did you know that you can send that directly to your church or any charitable organization? And as long as you send it directly, you don't have to pay taxes on that withdrawal. If they send it to you, you pay taxes. But if you send it to the church, then that doesn't count as taxable income. That could be a great way to give. Another great thing was, we were talking about William. We were talking about this at lunch. Princeton and a lot of these Ivy League colleges, they could be around for years and years without any more tuition money because they have these endowment funds. You know about this, right? Like people, okay, it's a little bit of a rant for me. Think about the audacity that a lot of these institutions of higher learning have. They have billions of dollars. I don't know what Princeton's endowment fund is, but like Harvard is like a 40 billion, Yale I think is like $30 billion in an endowment fund, and they host big fundraisers every year, fancy events, and they ask people to write big fat checks, and they don't feel bad about it. And I'm like, you have billions of dollars. Why are you asking people for more? But you know what? People will gladly sign the checks because they believe in that institution. Folks, I believe in Kendall Park Baptist Church. I believe in the mission of what you're doing here. It is more important than any other organization, any other mission out there. Wouldn't it be great to take that same attitude and approach towards this? Now you say, what are you talking about, Nate? How donor advised fund? It works very similarly to an endowment fund. Let me try to illustrate it a little bit here, okay? So, and there's some very, very powerful ways where this can be beneficial. So you have somebody, and you're going to have to excuse my artistic skills. This is as good as it gets, folks, okay? And they have some money, okay? And this could be cash, but very often it's investments, mutual funds, stocks. And let's say that, let's say it's stock. And that stock, when they bought it, was $10 a share. But now it's $100 a share. So what happens if you sell the stock and give the money to your church? Uncle Sam is going to come in and swipe out a good portion of that in capital gains tax. But did you know that if you take those stocks and donate them to a donor-advised fund, and then they sell that investment, zero taxes are paid. Because a donor-advised fund is, in the eyes of the IRS, a charitable organization by itself. Once the money is in the donor-advised fund, it has to go towards a charitable organization. Okay, and there's my church and steeple, okay? It has to go to a charitable organization, but you control how and when. So here's how people will operate with donor-advised funds very often. They'll take a considerable amount of money, donate it to the donor-advised fund, sell those investments, because they're usually in one fund or one stock, so that they diversify immediately and sell without having to realize any taxes. And then what they do is they invest that money so that it grows over time, and they can give even more money. And each year, maybe they distribute 4 or 5 or 6% of that fund towards giving. But what's happening is, as they're giving each year, the fund is also growing. So, maybe a $100,000 gift grows into $300,000 over the course of 20 years. Now, there's lots of pros and cons. I'm not saying that this is the only way or the best way to give. What I'm saying is there's lots of creative ways for there to be a win-win, to save on taxes, to do something impactful, and to maximize the impact of giving, okay? There's so much more I could say on that. I can't get too caught up on a rabbit trail, but I needed to give a few minutes towards that, okay? Charitable trust is a similar thing where what you can do is, a couple of different ways you can do this, really, is you put money in a trust and you get income from the trust every month to supplement your income, and then whenever you pass away, whatever's left over goes to the church. Okay, that could be another way that people do that. Because you say, well, I want to give, but I need this money now for my income, but I still do want to give whatever's left over. That could be a great way to do that. So lots of creative ways, and I just want to put that kind of bug in your ear to say, hey, think about some of these things. Plan them out now. Talk to financial planner, tax professional, estate attorney. Get some good advice on those areas about how to do those things. Okay, let's move to number 4. Live score. So give is our generosity. What's live? Live is our spending, our needs and our wants. Back in the 1500s, a guy by the name of Martin Frobisher from England, who was an explorer, came to Canada, and he struck gold. Found some shiny ore. He's like, we made it, baby. Goes back to England, brings a ton more ships. He ships 1,400 tons of this stuff back to England. Unfortunately for Martin Frobisher, it wasn't until it got back to England that they're like, this isn't gold. It's pyrite. Fool's gold. Talk about a disappointment, right? Wouldn't it be disappointing to spend a significant chunk of your life and significant chunk of your assets on something that you only found out later was fool's gold? Wasn't really worth it? Okay, when it comes to our live score, let's make sure that we're aligning our spending with our values. And how can we do that if we don't even know where it's going in the first place? So I would highly, highly recommend that you track your spending. 80% of the value of a budget is awareness. Here are some great tools. Okay, now you may already budget. You may already do stuff that's like, yeah, I already do this, Nate. Great. But here are some ones that I found that are very helpful. Every Dollar is my personal favorite. It's what I use. YNAB, if you want like all the bells and whistles, YNAB is the most robust of those. Rocket Money, Monarch, very good. Just use an Excel spreadsheet. By the way, if you want an Excel spreadsheet, I will email you one. info@NateSkelly is my email if you want to email me and get that. info@NateSkelly, Skelly. And I'll be happy to send that to you. Here's the thing. I'm pretty agnostic when it comes to which tool you have to use. Just use something. Track your spending. Know where it's going. I mean, folks, I'm not trying to get like political here. I'm just saying this because it's in the zeitgeist right now. This whole thing with Doge and the auditing the government and government spending and all of that. Like, okay, in your personal spending, how can you confidently say that I'm using my money wisely if you don't even know where it's going, right? Okay, so that's what these help us to do, to actually track and to know where our money is going. Why does it matter? You say, Nate, well, that sounds good, but I'm just not really a finance person. That's just not really me. I don't really feel like doing that. Why should I care? Let me give you 3 statements. Why does it matter how we spend our money? Well, number 1, God is the owner. Did you know that? God is the owner. That's number 1 on your handout there in the next section. Why does it matter how we spend our money? God is the owner. Everything belongs to him. You say, no, I earned this money. I worked the job, I saved it, I put it in the 401k, I put it in the bank account, I bought this house, my name's on the mortgage, my name is on the title of the car. Okay, folks, it's all from God. He's the creator. You know what the Bible says? He's the one that gives us the power to get wealth. Where did you get your energy? Where did you get your intellect? Where did you get your skills? Where did you get your opportunity? Oh, did you give yourself that? Or did it come from God? No, God is the true owner. Without him, we don't have anything. But number 2, we are the manager. We manage God's money. So it's his, but he's actually given it to us and say, hey, you get to make the call. You get to make the decisions. But thirdly, we have to give an account. You realize that, right? So everything that you do with your finances, all these important decisions you make, did you know that you answer to God for that? That there is an accountability factor to just like how you spend your time, just like how you treat other people. You have to answer to God for how you managed your money. How are we doing so far? If you had to give yourself a report card, how are we doing? Is it a B plus, C minus? Okay, so it matters because it's God's money. All right, how do we calculate our live score? Okay, just like with give. 2 factors. How much do we spend on needs? And what are needs? All right, groceries, utilities, clothes, going to the doctor, those types of things. So those are necessities. How much am I spending on that? And then secondly, how much am I spending on wants? And there's lots of things that can fit in the wants category. Entertainment, restaurants, vacation, golf, all that good stuff. All right? So how much do I spend on needs? How much do I spend on wants? Add those together and then divide by our total income. Okay, so again, to use our example, if I'm spending $3,000 a month on my needs and on my wants, then that's $36,000 a year. And if my household income is $100,000, then that means 36% of my income is going into the live bucket, the live jar, okay? What are good ranges? Well, again, take this with a grain of salt because it depends. It depends on a lot of things. It depends on where you live, your family size, income, all of those things. 30 to 45% is excellent. 45 to 65% is good. 65 to 80%, that's high. 80 plus is very high. That's not a range that you want to be in. Why? Because if you're spending 85% of your money on wants and needs, that doesn't leave a lot for all the other jars, right? If almost all the M&Ms are going in this jar, we don't have a lot of M&Ms to spread out into these other jars, and they're also very important. So if you want to improve your live score, how do you want, like you say, hey, I want to do a better job with spending. What are some ways I can do that? Well, start budgeting and tracking. That's one way. Shop your insurance coverage. I'm thinking mainly like car, home insurance. Always good to do that every year or two. Plan out your food spending in advance. I'll tell you this right now. Almost always when people are overspending, food is like the number one culprit because it's just so easy to do. And I love going out to eat. Like I'll be the first one to admit, like I'd rather go to the restaurant than cook a meal at home, but you got to be careful, plan that out in advance. Cancel unused subscriptions. I mean, come on, folks. Do we need 6 streaming services? We all do the same thing. You get on there, you click around for an hour, still can't find anything to watch. Cut that down. Use 2 that you actually watch. Space out new purchases. So, for instance, yeah, sometimes you do need new shoes, you need a new computer. Okay, but sometimes you just want it. And if you'll space that out a little bit more, that'll be good. 24-hour rule. I love this one. Set a dollar amount for yourself. Maybe it's $100, maybe it's $500. I will not buy anything above this dollar amount without waiting 24 hours first. Not going to buy a new car, not going to click buy on the vacation package or any of those types of things until I sleep on it. And you'll be amazed sometimes the things that seem so good and so obvious in the moment, you sleep on it and you come back the next day, you're like, yeah, no, maybe not. So use the 24-hour rule. Okay, moving on. Number 5, O score. All right, this is your obligations. Sometimes we're our own worst enemy. I'll be the first one to admit that. Sometimes it's not somebody out there who's our biggest financial obstacle. It's ourselves. I like this quote. If your outflow exceeds your income, then your upkeep will be your downfall. Think about that one for a second. All right. Number 1, debt is not a sin, but it is a burden. Debt is not a sin, but it is a burden. We talked about this earlier this morning. Okay, it's not wrong to go into debt, but you are placing a heavy backpack on your back. Be careful about that. Number 2, we need to pay taxes and obey every law that doesn't contradict God's word. So our obligations for our O jar, debt and taxes. Because those are things that are obligations. We don't really have wiggle room in those areas. They need to be paid. So if you want to figure out your O score, well, you add up your loans, mortgage, car loan, student loan, credit cards, etc., and then add up your taxes. This one's a little bit more tricky because those can come in various different forms. Easiest thing to do is look at last year's tax return. You say, Nate, I don't know how much I pay in taxes. Where would I even find that information? Look at last year's tax return. Look at your total tax owed. You add those together. Those are your total obligations. You divide it by your total income. So if it's $30,000 a year, $100,000 income, 30% is your O score. Now, with taxes, you say, well, what's the tax rate I should be paying? Well, it's just going to depend on your income. Depends on what state you live in, too. All right, not to rub it in, but I do come from Florida with no state income tax, so I don't have to worry about that. So taxes are going to just depend. The higher your income is, the more you're going to pay in taxes. And there's definitely some things you can do proactively to save on taxes. But with debt, at least, just looking at your debt, here would be the ranges I would tell you. Say, Nate, how much should I be paying for a mortgage? What is okay to be spending on debt? If you're between 0 to 25% of your total income going towards debt, that's all of your debt, then that's excellent. That's a good range. If you're between 25 to 35%, that's good. That's a healthy range, no problem there. 35 to 40% is high. 40+% is very high. Now, I know, listen, I know, I get it. Housing prices are much higher than they were a few years ago. You're here in Jersey, it's not the cheapest place in the country to live. And housing prices have just gotten more and more, it's just more and more expensive and less affordable. But here's the thing. There's only so much to go into these 4 buckets, and the more you're putting into one, the less you have to put into the others. You see what I'm saying? So that's why we want to have these ranges, to kind of be like, you know how like the light comes on your dashboard when the car needs to be checked, the check engine light comes on? That's what these are, to say, hey, check engine light. This might be a little bit high. This may need some attention, okay? All right, so our O score. Now, let me just briefly mention a few practical ways to lower our O score. Use the debt avalanche or the debt snowball. For sake of time, I want to go and write on the board and do this whole thing, but I just don't have time. Basically, pick one loan, start paying all of your money that you can towards it to get it paid off. The debt snowball says you choose the one that's the lowest balance and pay that off first. Debt avalanche says you pick the one that has the highest interest rate, regardless of its size. Debt avalanche, mathematically speaking, is a little bit better. You will pay off your debts faster and pay less interest. The debt snowball has a psychological advantage because you get a win under your belt quickly. So because you're starting with the lowest debt, you pay that off fairly quickly, relatively, and it gives you that momentum to keep going on. Honestly, either one's fine. Just pick one and stick with it and use it. Consolidate loans, refinance, have an emergency fund. This is a really big one. 3 to 6 months. You say, how much should I have in savings? 3 to 6 months of your living expenses. If you spend $5,000 a month, 3 months is $15,000. So that sounds like a lot of money, Nate. Yeah, right. If you don't have an emergency fund now, it might take a while to build that up. If you have consistent income, 3 months should be sufficient. If you are self-employed, if you're in sales, if your income is kind of up and down, ebbs and flows, you want to be closer to 6 months of living expenses. Because, like I said before, things are going to go wrong, and they're going to go wrong at the worst possible time, and you want to have that cushion. Don't co-sign. Contribute to tax-advantaged accounts, putting money in a 401k, IRA, Roth IRA, health savings account. These are great ways to lower your taxable income. Charitable giving, deductions. We talked about that a little bit under give. Great way to lower your taxable income as well. Sometimes to pay off a loan, you may just need to sell something. It sounds extreme, but sometimes that's what it's going to take. Okay, number 6, growth score, our last bucket. This has to do with our savings and investing, growing money for the future. Don't save what's left after spending, spend what's left after saving. That's what Warren Buffett says. I love that advice. Okay? That's what people do usually. They spend all their money and they're like, oh, do I have anything left over to save? No. Save first, then spend. What does the Bible say about saving? All right, number 1, it's wise to prepare for the future. Number 2, it's wise to be disciplined. Number 3, it's wise to make your money work for you. Think about future you. Okay? Can you imagine for a second? Future you? Is future you happy with current you? Or is future you upset with current you? Think about it that way. It's for real, though. Think about yourself in the future. Will future you be glad that, hey, current me is paying off debt, current me is saving, current me is planning out my spending? Future you will be very, very thankful and grateful. Okay, how do we calculate our growth score? Just like we've been going through, add up all your savings and investments. How much do you put in your retirement accounts? How much do you put in like maybe 529 account, education account? How much do you put in savings, CDs, money markets, all of those things? Add it all up, total savings and investments divided by your income. If it's $12,000 a year, then a 12% growth score. And here's the thing. If you are doing this correctly, math majors, if you figure out your score for each of these buckets, guess what they're going to add up to? 100%. If it doesn't add up to 100%, you did the math wrong. You need to go back and do it again, okay? Because it's always going to have to add up to 100%. How much is going into each bucket? For grow ranges, 0 to 5 would be very low. 5 to 10% is low. Really what we want to aim for is 10 to 20%. Ideally, 10 to 20% of your income going towards savings or investing. Some ways to do that: automate your contributions. Don't take the guesswork out of it. Just set it up. $500 a month into my Roth IRA. 5% of my pay into my 401k, and I get the match. Get full retirement account match from the employer. By the way, if your employer offers you a match, take the match. It's 100% return immediately. You are immediately doubling your money. Why would you not do that? It's the easiest thing in the world. I would take the retirement match before I would take that money and pay off credit card debt. Think about the math on that. The employer is saying, I will give you double your money, and the paying off the credit card, you're getting, you're paying off 20 or 25%. They're both good, but the match is that much more powerful, okay? Systematically increase contributions each year. So you say, well, Nate, I'm struggling. I want to save more. I'm doing 3% right now. Okay, bump it up to 4. And then next year, bump it up to 5. And then next year, bump it up to 6. Just incrementally, little by little. Replace unnecessary spending. If you want to start saving, you're like, Nate, I can't save. I have no money to save. All right, do this. Do a little audit of your spending. For everything that you find that you don't need to spend on, you say, oh, I've got this subscription, this entertainment subscription for $15 a month. I don't need that. Great. Take that $15, start putting it in your savings account, right? So trim unnecessary spending and then reallocate that money towards your actual savings. Okay, I told you guys, I'm hitting you with a fire hose of information, but I'm going quickly because we've got to get to this last section. All right, putting it all together. If you will do this homework, I promise you it will help you in your finances. If you will take some time this week, take 15 to 30 minutes and put this all together, this will give you a great playbook for making better financial decisions. We start with our financial why statement. The role of money in my life is to blank. Remember, for me, it's to have a flexible schedule, to travel with my family, to be generous with my time and money. It's going to look different for you. Whatever that is, put it up in that top line. And then list out some goals. I only have 3 spaces on purpose. I don't want you to list out 20 goals because that's too much to keep track of. Keep it to 3 of the most important. If you think of 7, narrow it down to your top 3 and put them on that paper and say, this is what I'm working on right now. Then figure out your give, live, owe, grow score. Okay? Figure it out. Now, here's a little hint. Leave live score for last because that's probably the hardest one to track. So if you do all the other 3, then you'll know the live score by default, right? Does that make sense? And then, action steps, okay? Write out a charitable giving goal for this year, list out your monthly expenses, decide which ones you want to keep, cut out, ask if there's any current debt that's helping or hindering your why statement, automate your savings. There's a book list at the bottom. If you want, you're like, hey, Nate, this is good. This got the wheels turning. I feel like I really want to, in 2025, do better with finances. Is there more resources you can give us? 4 great books. Some of them are written from a biblical perspective. Some of them are just from a practical perspective. All of them are excellent, and I'd highly recommend each of them. Let me end with this, okay? Told you we'd get to this. And then we're going to do our Q&A. Here's your income. Here's how most people do. Give, live, owe, grow. I get my paycheck. I pay my bills, my mortgage, my car payment, my taxes. They come right out of my paycheck. Okay, There we go. And then I take the rest of the money and I start paying for my needs, my utilities, gasoline, and just wants, entertainment, activities, going out to eat, groceries. I do all that. And it's the 30th of the month. And this is what I've got left. Maybe I'll throw a 20 in the plate. And maybe I'll put a little money in the savings account. And that's what most people's cash flow looks like. And people say, well, next month I'll do better. But you know what happens next month? I got to take the car to the shop. Yeah, it happens. Oh, the kids got this thing with school, the travel sports, I got to pay for that. So next month, next month, next month. You got to change up the order. Going live, and then give, grow, never works. Remember this. Give and grow before you live in O. Can you remember that? Give and grow before you live in O. Here's how it should look. By the way, I know the kids, all they're thinking about is who's getting those M&Ms when he's done with this illustration. Okay? Here's what you should do. Here's my income. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give, because that's who I am. It's important enough to me that I give. And I've set that. And I have that between me and the Lord. I give to my church. I give to those in need. I'm giving. And the second thing I do is I'm going to grow. I'm going to put money in savings for emergency. I'm going to invest for retirement, because I'm not going to live my life hoping for the best. I'm going to plan for the worst. And then guess what? Then I'm going to pay my mortgage. I'm going to pay my taxes. Okay? And then I'm going to pay for gasoline and for groceries and, and there's always going to be some leftover for some fun stuff. There just is. I'm telling you. You don't believe me? You're like, no, Nate. If I did what you just told me, I'm not going to have any money left over. No, you will. Okay? For golf, for going out to eat, for whatever it is, there's going to be some left over, but it might just not be as much. And you might look at that and say, but that sounds no fun. I don't want to live my life. What's more important to you? Is generosity and saving for the future more important to you than some temporal fun stuff now? And that's what you have to ask yourself. And this is where we live. This is why the financial why statement is so important. We've got to come back to that on a continual basis, and there's going to be some leftover for some things that we want to do. Okay, I know I gave you a lot. I gave you a lot. Let's transition now. Pastor Josh is going to come up here. We're going to do some Q&A. Thank you. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your patience in all this. I know we've spent a lot of time sitting and learning, but I hope 1 or 2 or 3 things that we just went through, you'll be able to take home this week and start implementing. And if you do that, I promise it'll have been worth it. I promise that. Okay, let's move on.